We want to introduce to some and present to others our Dr. Divine Pryor. And I hope I'm not belittling you by saying this, but he spent 10 years in prison. But after that, dual PhDs, a professor formerly from Medgar Evers, and he heads the New Leadership Solution for Criminal Justice, and has been asked even by the president, consulted in this manner. So let's receive our Dr. Pryor, who's also a pastor at this time. God bless.
Amen. Thank you so much, man. Thank you, Pastor Curtin. Good afternoon. First and foremost, let's give honor to God, who is the head of my life. We give honor to the angel of this house, Pastor Roy Curtin. We give honor to all the men and women of God who are in attendance today. Certainly want to acknowledge my friend and colleague, the Bishop, Dr. Milton Rochford, here with us today. We want to acknowledge you, those who prepared the food, those who licked envelopes, got up early, who just did what God called you to do to prepare today's program. I'm honored and I'm humbled to be in your presence today. And the only promise that I can make to you is that I won't be before you long, but I will be before you as long as it takes. As Pastor Roy Curtin said, I am a preacher. I'm not going to preach today. But if the Holy Ghost steps in, and I don't have any control over that, so y'all can't blame me. But I'm here today and really in my role as an advocate. My name is the Reverend Dr. Divine Pryor, and I do hold a double PhD in forensic science and in criminal justice. And I'm thinking about what I would say today. I know we have a particular theme. I thought I would start out by letting you know a little bit about me, my testimony, and then we're going to talk about why I'm here and some things that I think that we can do together as a community to address this issue. Now, I make a disclaimer and say it's really unfair for me to try to stand here in about 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes, and try to condense 400 years of history into this small space. But certainly I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of history in there just to give us a backdrop so we understand that we didn't just get here by osmosis. This situation that we're in today, 2.3 million people in prison, a recidivism rate of 720,000 individuals every year leaving federal and state prisons, returning back to communities like this. Recidivism rate as high as 70%, meaning 7 out of 10 people that come out go back within 3 years, and 1/3 of them go back within the first year. That we have right now over 1.8 million children of incarcerated parents, and a child of incarcerated parents is 9 times more likely to go to prison themselves than a child whose parent is not incarcerated. Just throwing some numbers out there. So my story is really similar to a lot of stories you know. I did grow up in a 2-parent home. We managed to buy a home in Queens in 1968. Certainly we didn't have a welcoming party. We were one of the first black families to move in Rosedale, Queens. Territory was a little hostile, to say the least. There was some racial tensions going on at that time, as you know. The school busing program was in full effect. And we had some issues, but we managed to make it. And, you know, I was in the public school system, and we realize now, you know, hindsight is 20/20. We realize now that my intellectual growth was happening much faster than my physical development could handle. And so because of that, there was a void, and I was not being stimulated to the degree I needed to be. So when you're not stimulated in school, you do stuff. And so I did stuff, and the stuff that I did, they said I was disrupting the class. They said I was bad and I was incorrigible and all these things, and began to put me in detention, and no one ever tested me. No one ever stopped to say, well, what's wrong with the boy? My grandma, who spoke parable like most grandmas, ain't nothing wrong with that boy. Except he needs to be knocked upside his head every now and then. But, you know, the school system then and unfortunately today is not really so good at diagnosing things outside the classroom. You know, I come from a large family. There was 9 of us in the house, and if you didn't get up early enough, you might not get your bowl of cereal that morning, which meant there were many mornings that my brain was in competition with my stomach, and my stomach always won because it growled real loud. So, of course, I wasn't attentive. So, as a result, they said that I had attention deficit disorder. Not that he was hungry, not that, you know, some other things may have been going on in his life, and, you know, that's part of the problem. But I ended up, you know, in the streets, and they welcomed me with open arms. In fact, they heard that I was kind of smart. You know, I like to read and write and science, and, you know, we got this car we're trying to start. We don't have the key, but maybe you can figure out how we could do that. And, you know, I was helpful. And, you know, I was popular. And everyone wants to be popular, by the way. Everyone wants to be accepted, wants to be a part of. So I enjoyed my popularity. I'm not here telling you I didn't enjoy it. I loved it, you know. And we did things, and they introduced me to smoking cigarettes. I remember the first time they brought me a cigarette that was a little different than the one we had been smoking. They said, well, don't worry, that's a special one. And I remember I took a puff, and I felt special. I felt real different. I was light and fluffy. And, you know, the rest was history. I ended up in prison at the age of 17. And it's interesting because there was a nun who used to give out books. She used to come by and she'd give you a book. And I said, well, I need 3 or 4 of those. She says, we don't give 3 or 4. We give 1 book. And so I said, well, I need 3 or 4. I read a lot. She said, you read 1 book. When you finish that, I'll give you another. And so the next day when she came, I gave her back a book, said I need another book. And she said, you read the book? And said it as if she was accusing me of not being truthful. And I said, yes. She started to question me about the book, and I started answering the book. And she said, you actually read the book? I said, yes. So she and I got a relationship, and one day she asked me, she said, why are you here? I said, I'm here because I got caught. She said, no, why are you here? I said, well, I went to court. They found me guilty. And she said, no, why are you here? And I didn't know how to answer her. She said, obviously, you're a bright young man. You're very smart. You told me you had a mother and a father. You grew up in a house, so I'm not understanding why you're here. And that's when she and I had this relationship, and I ended up going to school. And so I was formally educated in the prison system. When I went in prison, I didn't even have a GED. In fact, when I took the GED, I scored so high that the correction officials said that I must have cheated, and they made me take it over. And I took the GED over, and guess what happened? I scored even higher. To God be the glory. And, you know, I never can forget that they never apologized. And for some reason, that bothered me. I don't know why it should have bothered me. I didn't know them. They didn't know me. But the fact that they accused me the first time, and then I proved them wrong, and then they still didn't apologize was troublesome. And so I ended up going to school, got my associates, got my bachelor's, got my master's. And before I came home, I was accepted in 3 or 4 doctoral programs in New York City, because I was always kind of like a nerd anyway. You know, I took the, you know, school like a fish to water, and I still to this day. And interestingly enough, I was sentenced to over 100 years in prison. The only reason I came home, but God. Turns out that I was arrested on the 3rd floor of a 2-family house. And I want y'all to process that. Because there's no 3rd floor in a 2-family house. They made some administrative mistakes, and the mistake they made allowed me to find a loophole and get what they call a sentence modification. And they took all my sentences and they ran them together. And a year after that, they said that I was eligible for the parole board. And so after serving 10 years, 8 months, and 17 days, I was released by the parole board in 1990, and I've never looked back since. So So that's just a backdrop. Now we got to get into why I'm here. It's so interesting that when I came home in 1990, in the year 2000, the same district attorney who had sentenced me to prison in 1980 appointed me as his senior criminal justice consultant, and I traveled with him all across the country. That was District Attorney Charles Hines from the Kings County in Brooklyn. And from there, all kinds of exceptional things happened in my life. The Department of Corrections took credit for my education, and they wanted to use me as the poster child. And they said, look what happens when our rehabilitation system is so good, and here's an example. And I allowed them to use me because it let me go back into the prison. See, God will use who he pleases. And allowed me to go back in and restore hope to the brothers and sisters and let them know that there's life after prison. And so they gave me carte blanche. Now, I tell you, you're not supposed to be able to go right back into the prison when you get out. You're supposed to be out for a certain amount of time. But since they wanted to use me, I figured that I would allow God to use me, And so I went into the prisons, and from there, my life, took a different course. I went back to school. I was always fascinated with science, and, so forensic, science, for me was the natural path to go, because I could use that information not to try to get people convicted, but to try to help them avoid incarceration and to help those who are in to get out and to stay out. And so I could use my expertise, in a different way than it had been done traditionally. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I'm fascinated with science. I would love to come back again and tell you all the fascinating technology that is being used in crime scene investigation, and the fact that young people who are committing crimes don't even have to be concerned about someone dropping a dime, because every time they get on their cell phone, they leave their own unique voice print, and through satellite, they can actually tell not only where they were standing when they made the phone call, but whether or not it was them on their phone. They have to know that right now, when they go to a crime scene, they're looking for any physical evidence, and that physical evidence can come in many forms. It could be a hair particle, it could be sweat, it could be urine, it could be blood. They have this thing that they're looking for, deoxyribonucleic acid. Y'all know it as DNA. And they're looking for any form of DNA, 99.9% accurate. So if, in fact, you leave anything on the scene, they can trace it back to you. They don't know right now. They no longer use infrared, because during the Korean conflict, the Koreans learned that they could spot where the American troops were because they found a way to detect infrared. And so once this was learned, they discontinued the use of that. Now they use starlight scope. Starlight scope can take 1/1,000,000th of a millimeter of light and amplify it 10 million times, so they can make it a bright summer day in the middle of midnight from 10 miles away. They can spot the serial number on the bill you just took for the package you just passed. This is how sophisticated the technology is today. And we can go on and on, but I'm not here for that today. I just want to let you know that I'm serious about what I do, but you'd be surprised how I use that information. And particularly to educate young people about the fact that they shouldn't put all their business on Facebook. Right now, law enforcement have whole divisions that are assigned specifically to look at Facebook and to track you, and they tweet and they Twitter and they do all that stuff, and law enforcement is very, very, very interested in that information. And if young people knew the old corny saying, crime doesn't pay, they would know in the age of technology it's dead serious. So that's just a little backdrop. Now let me get started now. I'm only going to talk about 12 minutes about why I'm here, what it is that I do, and some innovations that are taking place across the nation and even in New York City that could be adopted here. I am a board member of Safe Harbor Mentoring Program and have been for many years. So, of course, when Pastor Curtin calls me, the only thing I say, well, hold on a second, let me get my pad. What day do you need me there, and what time do you need me there, and what is my assignment? So I'm here on assignment because Pastor Roy Curtin is a dedicated warrior. He's been in this work. We need to give him a round of applause, because certainly he is stalwart. He has that stick-to-itiveness, He has that passion and that drive and that concern and that commitment. He is a true man of God. He is a pastor through and through, and we certainly can learn from his mentorship, and I'm honored to have been associated with him for so long. And so why am I here today? 12 minutes, we're going to do this and get out of your way. I'm here today because America has a serious problem. You see, America has this desire to use the prison system to deal with all its problems. So any problem that it doesn't know how to deal with, whether it's homelessness, whether it's mental illness, whether it's drug addiction, whether it's social misconduct, whatever it is, America has decided we'll just lock them up. And so what happens is America now has the dubious distinction of having more of its citizens incarcerated than any other nation in the world. And the fact of the matter is that because so many people are incarcerated, the prison systems have swelled, people have begun to age in prison. When you age in prison, it costs more money, and so now the new problem is they can't afford to keep the people locked up that they locked up. On top of that problem, mass incarceration, which has occurred over the last 30 years. That's the term that a lot of folks are familiar with. That phenomenon, you need to understand. So I just want you to take a moment. I want you to think about, and I'm using an analogy here because I think that it'll be helpful for you to understand. I want you to think about tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is an infectious disease. If someone has TB, they can't keep them out in the public, so they have to put them somewhere so they can quarantine them and give them treatment. As we look at the data, what we are finding is this: in those areas where mass incarceration is taking place, just so happens that they have the highest unemployment rates. Those communities where all the folks are coming from. Just so happens that they have failing public school systems. Just so happens that they have substandard living conditions. Just so happens that they have poor quality health care. Just so happens that they have liquor stores conveniently located on every other corner. Just so happens that they have high rates of teen pregnancy. Just so happens that all of the ills, the things that would naturally put one at odds with the systems that would result in incarceration, exist in these communities where mass incarceration exists. We won't even throw on the disproportionate impact on black and brown communities. I mean, the numbers are startling. I wish I had the time to give you a history lesson, but I will tell you that when Michelle Alexander released her book, The New Jim Crow, she's a friend and a colleague, Bad Sister, she took the time to document the fact that today's criminal punishment system has always existed. It just existed in a different form. Years ago, they used to just straight up call it chattel slavery. Today, they've dressed it up, and now they call it Department of Corrections. But if you notice and if you look at where the prisons are, it's where former plantations were. And if you look back in history and you look at what happened after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, and it was learned that if you freed the slaves, that they would then not be available to pick the cotton and the indigo, and that they could not, raise the children and cook the food, and so there was another problem. And so what happened was that they create something called the Black Codes. And the Black Codes was a set of laws that were designed specifically to try to capture those individuals who were released under the Emancipation Proclamation into a new system of slavery. And so they had laws like the vagrancy law. A vagrant was anybody who was not employed and didn't have a place of residence. So imagine you're a slave and you get the word that you're free. And you say, oh my God, I'm free. You get your little bag and then you step off the plantation. As soon as you stepped off the plantation, you were arrested because you're breaking the law. You don't have a place to live and you're unemployed. And then right after that, the convict lease program, the convict lease laws were passed. And the convict lease laws were very interesting because this law said that any person that was not employed and did not have a place for residence, and they were arrested and incarcerated, that they could be leased back to the plantation. So now you are free for a moment. You're arrested because you broke the law. You're locked up, and then you're leased back to the plantation sometime before your bed even gets cold, because it was all systematically set up. Some of y'all older than me, so you'll probably remember even then they established the literacy laws. The literacy laws were very interesting because the literacy laws were for people who were free. They said you could vote. And so you were free and you went down to cast your vote. They said, well, before we let you vote, you have to first pass this literacy test. And if you passed the test, you were arrested because you're breaking the law. You see, it was against the law for a slave to read. There's no way possible you coming right out of slavery and you knew how to read to pass the test. This is on the books, by the way. You could type this right into Google, look up slave codes, black codes, Civil War, all of that will come up. And we could go on and on. But why am I telling you this? Because we still have black codes today. I mean, there's no question that the rule of law sometimes bends for some and not for others. And we know that, unfortunately, and Johnny Cochran said it best, he said justice in America is determined by how much you can afford. That means that the system is not fair. You're not supposed to be able to buy justice. Now, we're not going to even talk about the one who sits high and looks low, the judge of all judges. But man has created a system that has none of the qualities of fairness and decency and moral consciousness, but it's a very warped system. And so you need to know this. It's not easy for me to tell you this, and I don't feel good saying it. But if you're going to do this work, you have to know the truth. Know the truth, and the truth will what? Set you free. And so the fact of the matter is that we are fighting a system that has been in place for a long time. It's deeply entrenched, and it's based on class, and it's based on race, and it's based on gender, and it's based on being poor, and it's based on the need to try to maintain a labor system. You know that people in prison still have to do labor. That's how you get free labor. You know, it's interesting because if you look at the 13th Amendment of the Constitution, that's a real good one. 13th Amendment says slavery is abolished except if you're convicted of a crime. Now, I don't know if y'all know what that means, but I want you to read between the lines. Slavery is abolished except. Except means there's an exception. Means if you fit in this category, then you don't get the benefit of this what I'm passing. So slavery is abolished except if you're convicted of a crime, then that means you what? Still a slave. That means that you're not afforded the same rights as other folks. And so you're in the prison system and your labor now is still being extracted. You know that many of the products, many of us don't even realize that when we call certain places to get information, you're talking to somebody in prison. American Express is one of them. Victoria's Secret is another. Yeah, I'm naming names. And you should also know that if you work in any state office building, when you sit down at your desk and in your chair, that desk and chair was made by an incarcerated person. And these individuals are making pennies a day, unless you're making top dollar. Now, if you're amongst the high-ranking folks in prison, and I mean you got to be amongst the elite, you can make as much as $1 a day. Don't get excited. I know that's a lot. I know they don't even know how to spend that kind of money. $1 a day for people who work in the foundry. And they produce license plates and manhole covers and chairs and desks and all kinds of things that we don't even know that we use every day. So we have a problem. So now this is how we're going to solve the problem. Then I'm going to get out of your way. This is how we're going to solve the problem. We're going to solve the problem because we got to first know the problem. I told you that tuberculosis was infectious. They take you out of the area when you're infected. They put you in quarantine. They clean up the tuberculosis. And then when they say it's cured, they let you back. Well, but if you let me back in the area and the area is still infected, what happens? I get reinfected, right? So we call recidivism reinfection. Because if you haven't dealt with employment and housing and health care and all the issues in the communities that you're taking folks from, then when they go back, they get reinfected. So the recidivism rate is 70%. They go in, they come out. They go in, they come out. And you keep saying that if you could just fix the individual. The problem is, yes, the individual could probably use some help. All of us could use help, but we fail to look at the systemic ills. We fail to look at the laws and the policies and the statutes and the conditions and the situations that individuals go back into and that continuously reinfect it. So unless and until we're ready to clean up the infection, meaning the policies that are not fair, the ones that continue to condemn people, the laws that say that if you're convicted of a crime that you're worthless and you're useless and don't allow you to come back into society, the discriminatory practices that won't give people a second chance, many of whom never even had a first chance, the same laws that historically have been designed specifically to keep certain people in their place. So we have to attack those. So yeah, we got to go into the prisons and we got to work with individuals, but we also have to go into the halls of Congress. We also have to go down to our city councils. We have to start holding our law enforcement accountable. We have to start holding each other accountable. Oh yeah, we got to deal with Bob Kim and them too. Yeah, we got to deal with police who are shooting and killing folks who are unarmed, and that's true. And it's not all the police, but the ones that are, we need them out of there. Well, it's the same as in our community. Bob Kim and them, they acting up. We got to get y'all up out of there too. Now, I'm not advocating locking you up, but there are some folks who just need a little time to get their thoughts together. And this is real. This is not a nice conversation. When I have this, they look at me, Doc, you must be crazy. Didn't you do time? I said, yes. And I left some folks there that I'm still looking behind me, wondering if they let them out. Because they may not have been quite ready. But the problem is that we don't treat people like human beings when they're in prison. So you treat somebody like an animal in prison, you isolate them, you dog them out, you don't give them proper resources, you don't educate them, you don't rehabilitate, and then you expect them to come out and be, that doesn't even make common sense. Because we know that if sense was so common that everyone would have it, and a lot of folks don't. I call it good sense. So the fact of the matter is that there's work on many levels. So I'm going to share one or two examples, and then that's it. I promise I'm out of here. So what we're doing. So I run the Criminal Justice Center. We do a lot of stuff, and I'm always in a fight. It's only been since 2010, by the way. I don't know if you know this, that we had to work with the state assembly to make it illegal to have women handcuffed while giving birth in prison. You do know prior to the passing of that legislation, a woman was handcuffed to her bed. I couldn't even imagine. That's unimaginable to me. Prison is a strange place because the rules that govern prison, they're kind of weird. In prison, if you're going to be sick on Wednesday, you got to know about it on Monday. You don't go to sick call the same day you're sick because it has to get several signatures on it, and that takes a few days. So you got to know that you're sick before you're sick. If in fact you look at a female correctional officer, if you're a male and she feels uncomfortable, you could be charged with reckless eyeballing. That could put you in solitary confinement. God forbid if a correctional officer comes by and you don't hear them coming and they catch you, fondling yourself or something, you can and will be charged with destruction of state property. You don't own yourself, you belong to the state. When you're convicted in a court, they do what's called a transfer of custody. At the point in which corrections take you, you are now state property. And they reinforce that idea. They let you know every step of the way you belong to us. I remember a strange situation. A woman's son died mysteriously, and she came from New York City, with the funeral director to claim the son's body. And so they stood there while they brought the child out of the morgue in the prison and with the gurney, and they took the sheet off, and she had to stand there and watch as they took the handcuffs and the shackles off the dead body. Because corrections policy says that any incarcerated person who leaves the prison has to leave with handcuffs and shackles. Now, that may be true, but I'm sure they didn't mean dead bodies. I just want you to know how crazy it is. And then you wonder why when a person come out, they might be a little off. I could tell you some stories. Particularly when you have to be exposed to violence and the potential for violence around every turn. And when you're in prison, you ain't got to look for trouble. Trouble has a way of finding you, even if you're minding your own business. So the persons that you're dealing with, they need support on many levels. Emotional and psychological support, counseling and mentorship, that's just one thing, but they also need advocacy help. They need us to work to remove some of these barriers out of the way so that they can at least have a shot at being a productive individual. And so we help individuals clean up their rap sheets, because they definitely have to, anytime you have people that know more than you at a disadvantage. So anyone who's ever been arrested, we want to fingerprint you so that you can get a copy of your rap sheet. And the reason being is because the rap sheets have a lot of errors on them. And they have a lot of duplication. And sometimes you think the case is closed, it ain't closed. Some people walk around with open warrants and don't even know it. And then you get stopped for a routine traffic stop and they say, ma'am, sir, get out the car, and then they arrest you because you got a warrant from 18 years ago. So that's why if you've ever been arrested, you want a copy of your rap sheet. Other reason why is because when they get ready to do a background check on you, some of the information they're looking for is criminal background information. And if someone knows something you don't know, they catch you off guard, and something you overlooked, forgotten, and you can't explain it, and it makes it look like you're less than honest. And so we have to know what everyone else knows about us in order for us to be able to do what we got to do. So we're doing that work in Brooklyn. That's helpful because it allows us to know that there's some policies that got to be changed. There are people who have certain levels of felonies that they can't even apply for a certificate of rehabilitation, which removes unlawful barriers to employment until they've been out 5 years. Well, that don't make no sense. If I can't even get a certificate so I can work until 5 years after I get out, then what do I do during the 5 years I'm waiting? If it's a D or E felony, it's 3 years. And so we have to remove that barrier, so we're fighting that. And we're also fighting individuals who are trying to get inside New York City housing, federally subsidized housing, Mitchell-Lama housing. It could be senior housing. It could be any kind of federally subsidized housing that if an individual has a drug conviction, then they're denied access to that housing. In fact, so much so that if, in fact, the parent or grandparent doesn't take that child off their lease, they could be subject themselves to eviction. So that's a whole other issue now we're fighting NYCHA. So we're fighting a lot of issues, but that's on one level. Then on a community level, the community, we are guilty of a lot of stuff. And I want us to know. You know why? Every time some young people misbehave, they smoking weed on the corner, whatever, we call the police. And what we got to realize is that you don't need to be calling the police for every single thing that happens in your community. We need to start to govern our own affairs. We need the men to step up and be men. I mean, the women are doing a wonderful job, and we commend you for it, but brothers, it's time to step up. It's time to step up and handle our business. If men was men, we wouldn't have our young people out of control. But let me tell you this, when we make public statements about how our youth are out of control, what does that say about us? I mean, weren't they under your control? Weren't they under your supervision? Wasn't it your responsibility to guide them and direct them? What does the Bible say? Raise up a child in the way we would have them go, and they would never depart. So if they're out of control and they've departed, what does that say about us? Just figured I'd throw that out there. So we're doing a lot of that work. So 2 projects we're working on. One, I was sharing with Bishop Rochford that we're creating in Brooklyn. We're launching it in the spring, the Black Church Televisitation Network. And so individuals in Brooklyn will be able to go to a church in Canarsie, Flatbush, Bed-Stuy, Crown Heights, and visit their loved one hundreds of miles away in the sanctuary. They will no longer have to take the trip. Well, number one, the trip's very expensive. Sometimes people can't go for health problems. They don't have enough money to pay for child care while they go. All of those reasons. So we're going to allow you, I think for some small, $20 or something, to come into the sanctuary and have a 2-hour visit with your loved one. And the technology we're using is off the chain. And we're going to try to extend it out here. And then the second thing, and then I'll close on this note, we have been working for a number of years on what we're calling the Bedford-Stuyvesant Human Justice Initiative. And what this initiative is a community empowerment. We need to rebuild the community. We need to educate the community. We need to organize the community. We need to empower the community. And so we want to do that. We need to teach the community how to really build infrastructure and organization, how to get access to funds, city council funds and federal funds and state funds, and how to manage those dollars. And so we're going to be doing that work, but that's part of a larger effort. And another piece of it is arrest diversion. There's going to be an announcement this spring in Brooklyn that's going to blow the top off the nation in criminal justice. It will be announced that from that day forward, we will no longer be arresting youth in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. That's going to be revolutionary. That from that day on, after the press conference, that we will no longer be arresting youth in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. Won't be happening. But instead of arresting them, they will be diverted to a diversion site, which will be under my control, thank God. And they will go through our ambassadorship, leadership academy, and we will help them take their energy and their passion and their skills and redirect them so that they can become constructive, contributing members of society, and they will then be our future lawyers and doctors, because the fact of the matter is that once they are arrested and they go through the system, their life chances are diminished. And we realize this, and so we convinced our local precincts, we convinced our local city council members, we convinced our state assembly that yes, mass incarceration is a problem, but mass arrest is a big problem. Those individuals that get arrested, and it could be a bogus arrest, it could be a false arrest, it could be something minor. Why should someone's entire life be destroyed because they use poor judgment? And so instead, we need to divert them away, and we need to give them some skills, we need to empower them and put them back on track so that because let's face it, at the end of the day, they're going to be our future. And if we can't invest in our youth, then we may as well hang it up. Because some of us, many of us, want to retire one day, and someone is going to have to care for us. Someone's going to have to run the institutions. Someone's going to have to run the hospitals. Someone's going to have to run the schools. Someone's going to have to run law enforcement, the court system. Someone's going to have to do that. Who do you think that someone is? Our youth. You know, New York City prides itself in having the best garbage disposal system in the world, that we can recycle garbage better than anybody else can, but we can't seem to come to terms with recycling human beings. So I could go on and on, but I'm not. I'm going to start right here. Let me say that there's much that we can do, and there's much that we are doing, and I appreciate and recognize all the work that you're doing here at Safe Harbor and throughout the island and in your respective places. Even those of us who think that we're retiring and going away, we'll still be working when we get where we go, and we're going to find out there's work to be done. You know, as long as we have breath in our body. I'll close by leaving you with this. All of us here, everyone in this room, is going to be reduced to a hyphen. Not a semicolon, not a comma, but a hyphen. And a hyphen is a little indentation. It's that little mark on your tombstone between the date you were born and the date you died. That indentation defines your whole life. What did you do with your life? Was I my brother or my sister's keeper? Did I do something that's worthy of mention 100 years from now? Did I stand for something? Did I build something, establish something? Did I grow something? Did I do something worthwhile that gives my life significance? I wish I could preach. Maybe I'll come back another time. But what I will say is that you have to make your indentation. Otherwise, your life is in vain. Because if you're not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem. There's no gray area. And for you to not do anything is doing something. And that's turning a blind eye on something that you know demands your immediate attention. And so I'm asking everyone in this room to understand that the fact that you are here today is not by mistake. That the divine one, we call him Jesus, already had this engineered even before you were in the womb. He knew you'd be sitting here today. Before you even had a thought, you thought that you was running from your destiny, but actually you was running towards your destiny. You're here today for a reason, purpose, and a cause. I want everyone to grab their reason, their purpose, and their cause, and I want you to run with it. And I also want to thank you for your time. You've been wonderful. I appreciate it. God bless you. I will take a few questions, and then I'll be out of your way. Absolutely. Does anyone have a question? Speak now or forever. Go ahead, ma'am. there'll be no charges. So the young person, of course, you know, there's no offense. This is happening. We're negotiating. We have about maybe 18 things on the list. The one thing that I'm sure we can't negotiate is going to be homicide. That's off the table. You realize that. Maybe rape. But there are a whole lot of things that young people should not be getting arrested for. You don't arrest somebody because they had a marijuana joint. You don't arrest somebody because they was in the park after hours. You don't arrest somebody because they had a bike on the sidewalk. You don't arrest somebody because they jumped a turnstile. You don't arrest somebody because they had a fight in school. You don't arrest young people. So for most of the things that young people are being arrested for now, they won't be arrested for. That's huge. That's huge. And they'll come through the academy, and I can't get them fast enough. I can tell you, I got something in store. It's going to be fun, but it's going to be real.
Well, let's give Dr. Pryor another hand for the excellent presentation.